Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers here in the temple. In the red corner, the man currently going through Brass and Steel with me on Thursdays, good brother Monarch.
Pleasure to be here. I don't often get to show up for the Geek Watch.
Well, we have an earlier start time, so you should be able to show up more often.
To be fair, last week I completely forgot it was Sunday. Before that, something was going on, but yeah, last week was just dumb.
And in the in the red corner,
The other red corner, apparently.
Yeah, they're both red. The man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
The Dari Enterprises would like to remind you that every moon is a good moon so long as it is shapely and nice. Today we celebrate the end of Automatic Giraffe's 100 Days of Moons.
No, usually when it comes to moons, the ones that I always have to worry about are the ones that involve someone pulling their pants down.
I mean, these are the same type of moons, except they're all nice and shapely and, well, everyone's a different character.
Oh.
Even small Chibi Gouda was included.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about adaptation, as that is going to be the focus of tonight.
Indeed.
Now, you and I have ranted about two particular adaptations of IP into TTRPG form for being really, really bad.
An understatement.
And we'll probably end up revisiting those tonight in some form. But a lot of people have made this remark of course it was bad. It was a game adaptation of an IP. And I wanted to tackle this do's and don'ts tonight as a way to demonstrate that particular mindset that you might see when it comes to, say, film or television to video game form, that might be applicable there, and to a certain extent when it comes to board and card games, because there's so many ones that are just utterly disposable or just retreads of other games, just with a different IP slapped on it.
Mm-hmm.
Hi Monopoly, how you doing? But there are more successes than failures when it comes to adapting IP into TTRPGs, which is what makes the failures all that more baffling.
Yeah.
And I say that because we've had decades of years on what to do and what not to do. And
yet the same mistakes keep getting made.
Yeah. And I know one might say that the mistake is them being made in current year or something like that. Let me take you back to start this off. Let me take you guys back a bit to some of the early examples I know of. Now, putting aside the fact that to this day I'm still baffled at how Dallas got a TTRPG. And I only know about that because someone sent me a PDF scan of it. I have not read through the thing. I'm not sure if I'm prepared to read through it.
A little bit of trepidation, eh, Monk?
Yeah, if only because of the ridiculousness of it. Although to be fair, the Who Shot JR storyline could make for a good whodunit mystery in TTRPG form, so I can kind of see it if I squint sideways.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm just not gonna run it with anybody in the temple because it's going to devolve into the Simpsons parody of that whole thing. You know, who shot Mr. Burns?
Hmm.
Would that really be such a bad thing?
No, but if I'm gonna do that, I may as well go full Simpsons. The problem is, um, I wouldn't want a game to just devolve into Simpsons quotes.
And knowing our friend group.
Hmm. That's also the reason why, even though I have it now, I'm still very hesitant to run the Monty Python's co-curricular medieval reenactment program, which is not an RPG. Oh, hang on a sec. I've been told by my producers that is in fact an RPG.
Yep.
The person who told me it wasn't has been sacked.
Yep.
But the the point is that there is, like I said, more successes than failures. But if you want a really early example of failure, I would point to the TSR Indiana Jones games. Like if somebody want if some back in the day, if somebody said I want to run Indiana Jones, they'd probably say go grab the version by West End. Master Book is a little bit weird, but it's a bit but it's but it's better than what TSR did. And I know some people will be like, yeah, but it's TSR. They made D&D. How could they screw that up? Well, there wasn't any character creation. You were expected to play as the cast from the movies. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to figure out why that is such a bad idea.
I mean, I already know why it's a bad idea.
Can do that. Just watch the movie.
Yeah, and it's not like the mechanics were all that interesting. It was the standard roll under D100 setup that they had been using in stuff like Boot Hill and Star Frontiers. Um, the but it w- and the thing that's kind of funny is they had gotten the license in '84, and there were big ass names attached to the project, so I'm not sure why they fumbled the bag that hard.
Um, I mean, people just sometimes make mistakes, Monk.
Well, it was designed. It was first put in a box set that was designed by John Byrne and Zeb, aka David Cook. And
Hmm.
Coops, I see you.
One of these days, he's going to shoot us up like. Oh wait, that's the wrong thing to say.
Oh. But it had Robert Ansell handled several of the work, and one of the other big artists was Larry Elmore. It had a bunch of pre-made characters, basically Indy, Marion, Short Round, Willie, Sala, Jock, and Wuhan.
Hmm.
Um, they made 6 adventure packs and um, one accessory pack, and the game got hounded in critically, and unsurprisingly, it didn't sell all that well.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me either.
Uh, like if it was made in like '79, I might be a little bit more lenient. I guess the mindset that they had was that the people would want to make their own adventures with the cast, but that is the first mistake. That is the first don't, and that is assuming that people want to play as the official characters. And this is a mistake that continues to get made to this day.
I can't think of any gaming group I've ever actually had in which people just want to play as specific characters from me. Like, inspirations, sure. And it came up like before stream. I've not really played many IP inspired tabletops, but yeah, most people want to create their own characters and do their own things with them.
Yeah.
The way I see it most often, it's not them wanting to exactly play that character, but wanting to play an OC that is an XP of that character.
And well, obviously there's the whole thing with pre-gens, but there's usually an understanding that if you're doing a full campaign, um, you're probably not going to be using pre-gens. You'd be
Yeah.
Pre-gens are more of a one shot or a short campaign kind of thing.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I have played the Star Wars ones for 3rd edition, like back in the day too. I do like when they set the stats for what canon characters are. Like, all right, this is how Luke Skywalker would be built if you were to build him in this game. Setups like that are nice to kind of explain how the mechanics work in relation to the show proper.
Mm-hmm. And of course, eventually TSR let the contract lapse. West End picked it up, made the World of Indiana Jones, which was much more successful because it didn't fall into this trap. And
Yeah.
I'd say I'd say the best way to summarize this particular issue is something that we've said regarding some of the duds that we've covered. And I know you've explained this in the past, but I am going to ask you to revisit this, and that is what was intended when we had said there was a difference between um playing the source material and playing the world the source material takes place in.
Yes. And I'm assuming you want me to take that string then.
Yeah.
So what we mean by that is that you should take the source material's world, the soul, the ideas within them, and create a sandbox for anyone to play any story from that world they wish to. If you're playing the IP itself, you're set on rails. And while railroading sometimes happens just due to poor management, sometimes necessity, sometimes annoyance at fucking players that don't know how to read the goddamn room. No, I won't. I won't explain that one. But in the end, you want your players to be able to create, not just follow a story, but create. It's a collaborative creation. Yeah, there are rules, it's a game, but it's still a collaborative creation. And so when you have a sandbox, you have an open field within which to create. The sandbox determines the limits of how far creations can go, but beyond that, anything goes.
Mm-hmm. And Dragon brings up brings up TSR Marvel, which the proper name for it is Marvel Phase Rip. I can't call it TSR Marvel because TSR made 2 Marvel games. But something that everyone conveniently forgets about Phase Rip, the original release did not have character creation. The advanced book did. So
Yep.
which is what makes the what makes Indiana Jones TSR all the more baffling because um I think the advanced book came out before that. Like Indy came out Adventures of Indy came out in 83. And I know some people will say that will say that it came that like, and this the sole reason they can't call it um Marvel superheroes or MSHRPG is there are is I think the people who want to insist on calling it that are the same who would act like there's only and one entry.
Hmm.
But the and okay, I do have to correct myself. The first edition came out in 84, so about the same time. In 86, the advanced one came out, which is the one that everybody plays because the original 84 edition was very bare bones.
Hmm.
I mean, it had the basics of what was there, but I'd like to think that Jeff Grubb learned from Zeb's mistakes.
I would imagine as much.
Especially since with something like a comic book universe, there's so much you can do with it. But the obviously when it comes to when it comes to the whole playing in the universe, there are some settings that are going to be better at that than others. I think the
Hmm.
reason Star Wars and Star Trek made for such very successful TTRPGs is because the setting is large enough where you could do just about any story, and it doesn't have to involve the main cast. This was one of the dividing lines with the how do you want to brew this project that I had, and if someone looked at the short list, they'd say, "Wait, there's a whole lot of shonen battle manga in this list." That wasn't the plan.
But you know what they say about the plan, Monk.
Yeah, I didn't plan to have a bunch. It's just that for better or worse, a lot of shonen battle manga ticks all of the boxes that I specifically have in that kind of thing. The key thing is could a story be told in that world that doesn't involve the cast in that source material? And when it comes to some of the heavy hitters, whether it be Naruto or One Piece or the original Dragon Ball, I'm kind of iffy on whether or not you could do it with. Actually, I was gonna say I was iffy about doing it with Z, but it's been done already. So there are stories that there is a big enough world that you could tell other stories.
Yeah.
Uh, and well, let's consider the four entries um that are on the image. Um, Judge Dredd, Zorro, um, Avatar, and Robotech. Or sorry, Macross.
I was gonna say.
Fuck you, Harmony Gold. Um, now with Dredd, there's been multiple takes. There was Drox City, which I think was a Games Workshop project. Then there was a bit of flirtation with the D20 system and another flirtation with Traveler during the Mongoose era. Um, and most recently there was Dread in the Worlds of 2000 AD. which use the wine what's old is new system from EN World.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I've already talked about the wine system. As much as we clowned on Level Up 5e, wine is not nearly as bad as that.
Yeah, wine's actually pretty good.
Hmm.
You can check his review of it for more understanding.
Yeah, it they are it is a bit odd that they put out that it's only been in the last few months that they put out a starter box set for it, which was recently kickstarted. You'd think you think that had been done much earlier. And I see you, Rick.
First Coops, now Rick. Heck, Rick even copied Coops. You two are in cahoots.
Oh, Jesus! It's like we've got two people doing the Doku challenge.
The
But
Doku challenge.
the big reason why you could get away with what I mentioned in something like Dread is Mega City 1 is fucking huge.
Yeah, it's
Like
gigantic.
like when I say huge, it covers the majority of a vast majority of the northern end of the East Coast.
I'm going to get a map of it. Why not? Mega City 1 goes from Florida all the way into Canada, Monk.
So
Like,
it's
oh,
so it's
huh.
it's not just the U.S. East Coast. It's the continental North America East Coast.
Most of it, yeah. It just doesn't go up into, like, the Yukon and stuff. It's huge. Mega
Yeah.
City 1 is gigantic. So, like, there'd be Florida and Georgia, and, like, if I look at a normal uh, picture of the eastern U.S., that's going to be Florida, Alabama, Georgia, parts of Tennessee, South and North Carolina, Virginia and West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland, New York, all the way up to Maine, and then cutting across from Maine into parts of Canada.
Hmm.
So, Mega City 1 be Hueg, Xbox Hueg almost.
Which is I remember when somebody had asked, could you could you do could somebody do an open world style Judge Dredd game taking place in Mega City 1? I'm like, it would have to take place in one block and that's it.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just too damn big.
I think you could do a one that big if you did it the way um Death Stranding did it.
Hmm. I mean, maybe, but that is still. And just for a frame of reference, oh, you already put.
Yeah, I already put the picture in council.
Yeah. Um.
That's a huge bitch.
Hmm. And of course that's to say nothing about the other settings that are within the anthology series 2000 AD. One of
Yeah.
which had gotten a D20 based approach in Slain, and truth be told, I'd like to see Slain revisited one of these days. Who's
It would be interesting.
For those unaware, Slain is basically Conan, but even more Irish. But and of course, with things like Star Trek and Star Wars, well, you have a whole galaxy to deal with, and galaxies have millions of stars and billions of planets. So
We see what happens when you try to imitate a galaxy and don't do it very well. Hello, Starfield, and even earlier than that, hello, launch No Man's Sky.
mm-hmm. uh,
No Man's Sky has redeemed itself since. I'm not so sure about Starfield.
the only way Starfield will have any redemption is if it gets bailed out by the modding scene again.
Oh yes, the Bethesda way, because it's a Bethesda property.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I did
Yep.
see Seth's review of Starfield. It's
Yep.
rare to see him talk about talk negative.
He called it Star Slop. I loved it.
Well, it more or less is because
It's Bethesda slop.
mm-hmm.
So quick shill from me, and I'm doing it for free. So all y'all laugh at me if you want. If you want to play a futuristic game with a wide, sprawling, open world area with really good gunplay and melee play and impactful characters, play Cyberpunk 2077. Hold your laughter. It's gotten good since patch 1.3 and even better with patch 2.0. Plus, if you get Phantom Liberty, well, Idris Elba.
Mm-hmm. And the thing, and I know I and of course there's been no shortage of 40K TTRPGs. I'd say if there's one expansive universe that has little excuse to struggle with this, but somehow does. Honestly, it's the RPG adaptations of BattleTech.
It's because for some reason they try to keep BattleTech to the wargaming scene so slavishly.
Yeah,
Like they try to imitate the wargaming scene even in the game.
I have tried all 3 editions of MechWarrior, and it just hasn't clicked. Now, some of that is due to some of the old habits that happened around the 80s and 90s when it came to RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, the excessive skill lists. And I'd say designers didn't really kick that habit until the 2010s.
Yo, dog, I heard you liked having skills, so we put skills in your skills so you can skill while you skill.
Like you and I have gone through we've gone through plenty of those, and how sometimes the skill list is like a quarter or a third of the character sheet.
Or it has its own page.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when it had its own page in 3.0. Like there was a little bit at the top and bottom that wasn't the skill list. No, but the skill list was the page. Let's not beat around that bush.
Yeah, and even more ridiculous when you try and do that with skill points. If you do the off-on thing like what Planetbound does, that doesn't piss me off as much.
Yeah. You know, if skills make sense, you still want the skills to be not so micromanagey, I guess is the best word.
There is little reason to have a separate skill for pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, rocket launchers, and grenades.
At least in a TTRPG. In video games, it makes more sense, but we're not talking video games.
Yeah. Especially when you still... And the reason why I'm harsh on that is no matter what, you're going to have a limited amount of points that you're going to be able to put into various skills. And the more skills that you have, the less incentive you have to have a variety of skills. You know, sunken costs and all that.
Exactly.
And the other, I'd say one of the big things that is definitely a do, going on the whole do's and don'ts thing is research your ass off. Well, we did
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Like I've always told people, if you want to do your own little adaptation of something, it's not enough to just say watch the source material or play the core game. No, you have to go into full on crazy investigator mode.
Mhm.
Um, and I think this is as good a spot as any for you to go into evangelist and go into the amount of research we ended up having to do for Legend Edition.
We have done and are sometimes still doing research. Research isn't done, Monk. Remember that.
Hmm.
We at this point 2.5 years of total research and constant development, but we used, because ours is a Final Fantasy based TTRPG, we used hundreds of pages from the Final Fantasy wiki just for basic information alone. Not to mention the detail and granular nature we went into when we were designing titular NPCs and monsters from each of the series, just to make sure we had some examples of this is how you can create some of the most iconic monsters with our monster creation system.
Hmm.
We went through, and this is just on the Final Fantasy wiki alone. This doesn't go into the 12 or 13 different game systems we looked at and said, hey, this piece looks cool, let's use it.
Hmm.
The research we have done on not just Final Fantasy itself, but on games in general, to make a game we felt was indicative of the core ethos we had, was, I think the first 3 months was just us doing research. That was before just us, yeah. Like literally just discussing what was necessary and what wasn't before we even got into mechanics.
Hmm.
So if you're going to design a game, whether you're hobbyists like us or people who have their own dedicated studio for creating TTRPGs, or even just some people who might translate TTRPGs, you still want to be able to understand what's being said, how the mechanics work, in order to properly express that. So yes, research, and more research will be what you eat, sleep, and breathe.
And if anyone thinks that excessive, I will bring up Harv Bennett.
Once again, we bring up Harv Bennett
Hmm.
about his place in the Star Trek movies.
Yeah. And the th- and to that end, uh, you also have to present it in a way where somebody who is not as familiar or coming from a different background should be able to grasp the gist of things. Um, this is part of
There's
the
an old
reason why I was so harsh on Marvel Multiverse, because it was clearly building around the current iteration of Marvel Comics, but you're gonna have people coming in from a bunch of different backgrounds. So if they haven't
there
read the
is
comics, they're gonna be confused.
yes, there's a very old, I guess adage would be the best word here, that says an expert in a subject can break that subject down into simple concepts. You have to be able to break it down like someone is 5 so that anyone can understand it, so that you can make sure that somebody who's new can get the same meaning out of it as somebody who's experienced. If you can't do that, you're not really an expert.
Mhm. And when it comes to like I remember when I remember when I talked with Ed Jowett about Battlecruiser Alamo, which is based on a novel series of the same name. I was like, is somebody how much knowledge is somebody gonna have ahead of time to grasp it? And he had said not that much. It might help, but it's not going to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And especially since the even if the GM is going might have extensive knowledge, the players might not. So, and granted, this is the reason why I always make a primer.
Mm-hmm.
But as a bit of an aside, I will admit that there are some that are going to be easier to adapt than others. Like of the four that you see, something like Zorro is going to be easy to adapt,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking, since putting aside the pulp hero aesthetic of Zorro, the rest of it is just um pre state California,
Mm-hmm.
like that period of time that period of time of the California Republic,
Mm-hmm.
or I. I think the cartoon still had it where it was still a Spanish territory.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I do he says and Dragon says no magic, no advanced tech. What would you call his grappling hook? Like advanced tech is relative. And
Well, and like Zorro was during, at the very least, steam locomotives.
mm-hmm.
So, I, advanced tech is relative, and in this case, what would be advanced tech?
It's the same it's the same thing I brought up when it comes to he says advanced to us. That is, do you have the slightest idea how little that narrows it down?
Yeah.
And it's still advanced to. I had this conversation with the developers of sagas, OKSDM, because he did do that whole thing of what's advanced tech is based on a Earth standard. The problem with doing that is what could be considered advanced or rare tech could um or what is considered standard is is not something that you can have set when you're doing something universal or even trying to establish a particular setting. Um, I've been writing a campaign setting as a companion to FF Legend, and the tech level the way I've tackled technology is on a two-tier setup. Um, have a heavy amount of Magipunk, but also a lot of repurposed tech. The rule is the the you have first generation, which is the stuff that was found in old ruins of this civilization that existed before a cataclysm, and you have second generation, which is people reverse engineering what they discovered, which is certainly works, but it's nowhere near as good as first gen stuff. Or consider how what in some editions a rapier is considered a exotic weapon, or a katana or a katana or a katana are considered exotic weapons.
Which katana and katar being exotic weapons is a very Western Europe centric ideal.
Yeah. But if you were doing a game that was taking place a little bit further away from a European XP, it would be harder to argue that those are exotic weapons. Um, Qatar might be uncommon at most, not necessarily exotic.
Yeah.
And of course Qatar in a it's gonna be a bit more standard slash uncommon in a Japan XP kind of setting. So that's why I say that in order to figure out what advanced tech is, you need to figure out what baseline tech is, and even if
And
you're
it,
doing a period piece, that still gets a bit tricky. You can't just use current day as a baseline. The only time you can use current day as a baseline is when you're dealing with a current day setting.
yeah. When we say that advanced is relative, it's relative to whatever you've established as the norm.
Mm-hmm. So for somebody living in the 19th century, a steam engine would be advanced tech. And even something as simple as a grappling hook I'd still consider an advanced gadget.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but moving past that, we've already established the character thing. Um, and I know some people might find it cringe to come up with OCs in an established setting, but if you but like I said, nobody's going to want to play as the canon characters. They want to the that kind of goes against a lot of the ethos of playing a shared story in a TTRPG.
Mm-hmm.
And
Like, I'm pretty sure if you're against OCs in your TTRPG, you might be in the wrong hobby. This is
OCs
it's
are
kind of
really
a
the concept of OC is a really easy
yeah.
target, and that's why whenever when I've done commissions for my own characters, I never refer to them as OCs. I always refer to them as just characters, because unfortunately because of a lot of bad OCs over the years, we all know a few. We all know the signs when we see them. Um, there's a bit of a stigma attached to the term, and
I mean,
it's something I'd like to avoid if I can help it.
I think I think terrible OCs are just you're going to run into players that like that. It's not something you can really avoid.
Yeah, everybody knows that guy.
Always a that guy.
Mm-mm. Fuck that guy. Sometimes that guy is not a guy, but fuck him anyways.
Sometimes that guy might be you if you're not careful. Always be mindful at the table.
Yep. Don't be that guy. Be this guy. Is the general rule.
Exactly.
And the th- there's a there of course like we said, the you have to focus on the world where something takes place in instead of using the story as a base. You can certainly do that as a bit of hinting, but it's not something you can rely on. Uh, like if to use a bit of an example, consider let's go with Slayer's D20. I haven't talked about Slayer's D20 in a while. I mean, The book does have an episode guide for the Seasons of Slayers that were around at that time. However, however, it's not acting like if you're playing a caster that you're supposed to be doing some poor man or woman's version of Lena.
Hmm.
It is giving the different types of magic and building around that, but that's it. And a lo- and in that vein, I've been trying to avoid it for the longest time, but let's talk about Avatar Legends
Oh God.
as a demonstration of what not to do. Don't don't worry. This may seem painful, but it's gonna get worse. Now, I did end up getting sent a full version of Avatar Legends beyond just the demo that you and I covered.
Yeah.
I had considered I as far I guess the person who sent it to me had asked if I would consider it for Valley of the Judge, and I said no because I didn't see enough in it that would warrant us to change anything that we said at the time.
Exactly.
And once again, I do want to reiterate because a lot of people have been making this mistake. It using PBTA is not the problem.
Yeah. There was a bigger issue.
Yeah, that being as said before, it was hyper focused on the TV show and not the setting of it.
Yeah.
Uh, and moreover, the idea of wanting to stick to canon. And while I do agree that canon is very important when writing a story, when you're doing a TTRPG, it's not it that sort of canonicity has kind of a ceiling in terms of how important it is.
It also has a ceiling in how much you can do in that world.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a restriction.
Yeah. Plus, it a tabletop game is the perfect opportunity to explore a what if scenario in say comics. Um,
Oh. Hmm.
of course, if somebody asked me what sort of what if scenario I'd explore, I'd say something like, "What if Peter Parker told Mephisto to go fuck himself?"
You mean the good ending to One More Day?
Yeah. Or or I suppose another one would and if it sounds like I'd use that to forcefully to integrate the what if story that was Mayday Parker and some of the successor kids. Yeah, that's kind of where I'd go with that. Admittedly, you're going to be a bit hard pressed to see me run a campaign in say the Marvel or DC universe simply because of the amount of baggage I'd have to deal with as well
The
as
amount of baggage and the amount of goddamn heroes around the world.
yeah. I would much rather create my own superhero setting that has a limited amount of heroes or a superhero setting that's built for that flexibility right out of the gate.
Cough.
Um,
UA Great Lakes cough. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not cough non-obviously enough there?
um, and li- and even if I wanted to use something more official than what we did with UA Great Lakes, I could bring up say absolute power
Mm-hmm.
or champions
Mm-hmm.
or even the core city in mutants and masterminds. These obviously these are built for TTRPGs, so that's already cleared. But the only way for to honestly, if I was to tackle something within, say, the Marvel universe, you'd probably see me utilize a a neutral take on the X-Men.
Yeah.
If only because there's so many. The whole thing with originally mutants were because Stan Lee was running out of origin stories for how people got powers. uh, it was basically a way to bullshit that they could to have somebody with any kind of power they wanted without having to write a whole story as to how they got it. But because of that, and because of the framing of the Xavier Academy, you can put in just about anybody and say that they're a new student to the school, and relatively have it work.
Yeah.
I mean,
It worked. It worked for Stan Lee. So why wouldn't it work for any of the TTRPG people?
and I am trying to think if there's an equivalent that you could do with the DC universe, and there really isn't. I know some people will say the Titans, but no, that's just another that's just a hero team, not a hero school or anything centralized like that.
Well, and I'd like to point out that DC in general doesn't seem to be as scared of repeating this person got power from magic, this person got power from physiology, etc., over and over again. I mean, after all,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, DC Universe Online identified 3 major strains of what made powerful people powerful, even though there were way more in the universe. But, I mean, magic, tech, and metahuman power.
Yeah. I'd say the framing device I'd probably end up using is Justice League Unlimited.
Which would work.
Because with that sort of framework, there's large scale and small scale stories you can tell all the time.
Absolutely.
And some of them don't even need to involve the bigger ones. Years ago I did a Batman Irregulars story. If people are going to keep doing these Sherlock Holmes analogies with the world's greatest detective, even though Batman doesn't do drugs, so I can't really make the Sherlock comparison, and that comparison only really works whenever he's dealing with Raish.
How do we know he doesn't do drugs, Monk? How do we know? You don't get a physique like that naturally. He's definitely juicing.
But the setup with that was just Batman can't be everywhere at once, so he's working with a bunch of people to give them a few and be his eyes and ears. The Baker Street Irregulars. And Rick points out he's worked with Sherlock before. Brave and the Bold, yes, but Brave and the Bold is one giant Silver Age homage. So
yes, Brave and the Bold is one giant Silver Age homage, which is why we got an episode with fucking Neil Patrick Harris that was a musical.
Mm-mm. Look, for anybody who didn't read Silver Age comics, they were drugs.
Remember, Silver Age Superman could literally sneeze away solar systems.
And as far as the whole world's greatest detective thing, that's the perfect setup for you to bring up your favorite meme.
Yes. It is a cold and snowy day in Gotham. Batman is walking around with a megaphone. And through this megaphone, he says, "Has anybody seen the Joker?" World's greatest detective, everyone.
Yeah.
My favorite Batman.
But there's a, and of course, we've talked about this before, like when we did the tabletops fantasies are not final, tackling other console RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
There's often the issue of the right system. Um, and I have argued for the longest time that I know some people really, really like it. I know some people will swear by it, but I have never been convinced that Palladium was ever a good fit for Macross, be it Robotech or otherwise, because it's trying to go in that simulationism heavy approach. For some, simulationism doesn't really work well with things that are more informal. And something from look, I know Palladium Megaversal is my whipping boy for various reasons, but a lot of the early adopters of TTRPGs were the college types. The college types who hyper specialized in certain fields and wanted to have that same level of realism, but I think a lot of them kind of forget that they're still making a game. And if you want the best example of this not getting the bigger picture thing, look at our particular scuffle with Shad. I understood where he was coming from when it came to the animations thing that he talked about, but the problem that I had and the problem that you had when you ended up having that argument with him was that he was coming at this from the perspective of somebody who has far more of a background in HEMA than in anything revolving game development.
And it wasn't only that. And hey, Neff, thanks for coming in.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just that. Late. It's okay. Doku Challenge is now succeeded with Neff here. It was more than just that. It was more than just the whole. You're coming from an HEMA / I mean, if we want to get real technical, reenactment mindset. Mm-hmm. The biggest underlying thing he didn't seem to get was the developers want the animations the way that they are for a reason, whatever that reason is. We're only guessing as to the reason every time we talk about it, because we've heard some of it from Miyazaki and the other developers about why they've tweaked things this way or that, but we don't have the entire picture. We have enough to go, oh yeah, this is probably why these animations are this way. And so his whole thing is, oh, you could put these in and things would still be right. And my ultimate counter was, that's not the way the devs want to do it. You can offer all you want, but they don't want to do it that way. They want to do it their way. And his argument is, well, then that's bad design. No, it's bad design to him. There was actually a recent video released by Ratatosker, who, if anybody's played lots of Souls games, lots of character action games, Ratatosker has done a lot of explorations of those in a mindful way, where people get this criticism of, well, that's like your opinion, man, essentially. And yes, most of the things people review anything on, video games, movies, books, tabletop games, any of it, the vast majority of the things that are going to be said in a review are opinion. Because not everybody places the same value in the same things. The only parts of a review that are objective are things that you can point to and factually say, this is that.
Like an actual bug or something, a texture going wrong or something like that.
Absolutely. Things of that nature. Or if an animation is broken. Like if an anime
T-posing.
T-posing, or anything of that nature that has to do that negatively impacts in an objective way. T-posing, animations that don't come out, textures, like you said, all of that, and in the form of TTRPGs, that would be things like unclear instructions. Like you can definitely point to a thing and go, well, the instructions about this particular thing aren't really clear. There's so much variety of interpretation there that this mechanic may as well be meaningless. And we've pointed those out in a few games before, Monk, where we've talked about blank checks that aren't well enough defined, especially Fate.
Yeah.
And so, yes, what happened between Shad and myself and everybody else, yes, that was mostly opinion. And when he says that it's bad design, that they don't want to design it that way because the developers don't want to design it that way, that's his opinion. It is not objectively bad that the animations do not look like what you would use for those weapons in real life. It's a game, and the developers wanted it that way. So ultimately, you've got this issue of not just with our tiff with Shad, but anybody else who pulls this sort of this thing should be this way because I have expertise in something tangentially related. It doesn't really. It's not something that's anchored in game design, in the design of TTRPGs, and how those are supposed to balance out. I think I've prattled on enough about our tip with Shad.
Yeah, and I can only speak for myself when it comes to the opinions I've espoused in my reviews and in the Valley, but it's always in service of trying to help a given game meet its particular goals. I was not too long ago when I was asked to give my assessment of the primer for FF 5th edition. I was very harsh on the turn order mechanics that it had for trying to replicate active time battle, but doing it in a way where it made kind of the same mistakes that the tick system does in World of Darkness. Where regardless of how you do it, you're going to have people spending a lot of time not doing much while their meter is going up. And I suggested instead of trying to do ATB, I'd said why not take some cues from the Brave system from Bravely Default. Doing a degree of turn, but giving a kind of action economy with some actions being more expensive and having the consequence of you having to play defensive for a while.
Yep. Bravely Default and Octopath Traveler. Final Fantasies by any other name.
But
I mean, they are obviously their own thing, but I just like to make that joke.
It is.
It's homage.
Yeah. Would you say? Would you say the same thing with Triangle Strategy then?
Absolutely. Final Fantasy Tactics homage.
Yeah, but getting back onto the heart of the matter. Utilizing a set of mechanics that are able to maintain the same feel of what you're adapting is important. Like if somebody asked me, okay, what system would you use for a Macross game, and I'd say whatever system allows me to easily and effectively replicate dogfighting.
And lots of missiles. Dogfighting and lots of missiles. Those two things are Macross. And if we're going to go even further, Macross 7, Pasada Neki also must be replicable.
Well,
and this is why Palladium failed so badly.
This is also what, and of course, it's important to be able to fulfill the fantasy of why somebody would want to be in that world to begin with, without falling into the alpha issue. And
Mhm.
what I mean by the alpha issue is there are certain archetypes in some IPs that have such a have such a massive footprint that if somebody that it can be far too attractive for people to want to do some XP of that.
Doctor
Um,
Who.
yeah, I've run games with Cubicle 7's Doctor Who at RPG. Um, and one of the things I had made explicitly clear is you guys are all members of Torchwood. You're not if I even smell one of you trying to claim to be a rogue time lord, I will have you drink the pain glass.
It's been a while since you talked about the pane glass, Monk. You may have to remind the audience what that's all
Yep.
about.
The pain glass is one of my punishment games when somebody fucks up to a point where everybody looks at them like they just put their pants on their head.
Mm-hmm.
It is a shot glass filled with water, salt, sea salt, pepper, black pepper, and like 3 or so different hot sauces depending on what I can get. And you have to drink that. And then deal with the consequences when it comes out the other end.
I may be the bane of Monk's existence, but I'm not stupid.
Mm-mm. And the and when and I remember a story regarding Star Wars Galaxies, and this is apropos to this alpha character thing.
When Jedi weren't in the game, and then when they were.
Yeah, Jedi were not in until the NGE era of Star Wars Galaxies. We're talking Trials of Obi-Wan,
Mm-hmm.
which was the last major expansion. And the only reason they were in there was because SOE forced lead designer Ralph Coster to put them in there. For the longest time, they weren't in there by his design. And the reason he didn't want them in was because he felt that they would be an alpha class, according to him. That everybody would be chasing that particular thing.
Everyone wants to be a Force user.
And because of the fact that Star Wars Galaxies is a sandbox style affair with a very strong emphasis on its internal economy, that would create problems. So his solution was to try and make it very difficult. Like you have a RNG chance to be force sensitive, and you have to find holocrons. Unfortunately, people made maps for holocrons about a week into the expansion, so that didn't work out. And if I'm running, say, Zorro, I am not letting somebody be the titular character. You're in
Mm-hmm.
you're in that world, but you're not playing as that. If in a Conan RPG, I am very cautious if somebody says that they want to play as a Sumerian.
Yeah. Sumerians in the Hyperborea RPGs tend to be a little more balanced than being Conan levels, though. I think the later developers of Hyperborea have been very cautious about that.
Well, the first attempt was in AD&D, and it sucked. Then of course there was also the game that Zeb had made, which was not AD&D associated. That one was actually decent because it was just taking the action control table that was used in Phase Rip and applying it to Conan.
Mm-hmm.
And would eventually lead to a free version in Zephyrs, or Zeb's fantasy role-playing system. And that Because there were to try and capitalize on the film. TSR did make a couple Conan modules. I think one of them was called Unchained.
Mhm.
They also tried to do one for Red Sonja, but that was based on the movie That was based. Actually, no, that wasn't based on the Red Sonja movie, but shit rolled downhill. And I'm not sure if I agree. I think it's a little bit excessive what Arnie had to say about it. That he would he would to keep his kids in line. He would tell them if you don't start behaving, we're going to watch that movie. I think that's a bit much, but I understand why.
that's. I think that's just him being the funniest part of himself. Because Arnie's been a bit of a goof all his life.
Mm-hmm. Although fun fact, he was not allowed to dub the Terminator in German.
Because his accent was too hokey and backwater.
Mm-hmm. And in all fairness, German dialects are fucking weird.
We won't get into that.
But and I the of course getting back to Macross, the other issue that you'd have to tackle is just the whole three form transformation setup with all of the Veritech fighters, because people are going to want to be a fighter pilot and in a Valkyrie at the very least.
Yep. So you've got jet mode, you've got Gerwalk mode, and you've got Guardian mode.
And the big reason why I've said that Palladium was a bad call for this is because of that setup. You effectively have to juggle three stat blocks at once in that very detailed system. Putting aside all the other issues with Palladium, like the navigation issues or the fact that you have to house rule the shit out of it to make things somewhat reasonable.
Nah, Monk, I didn't have to create an entire new rulebook out of rulebooks. No. Never.
Even this is the reason why I actually prefer the version that Strange Machine did, because that one is far more abstract. And I do think when tackling something that's based on an action series, you can't really I'm not going to say you can't go simulationist. It's just that it's not advisable.
It will probably detract from gameplay.
Yeah, like
Probably.
going realism if somebody wants to do something John Woo inspired, then you're going to have realistic health, and let's be honest, that would be detracting from the point when it comes to those kind of movies. Like imagine having the same health bar that you see in Rainbow Six in Max Payne.
You'd never get past the first level.
Yeah, and as incidentally, when it comes to the people romanticizing realism in game design, my counter argument has always been, if that's the case, then why is it that if it's that big of a deal, why is it that Arma is so niche? Like, don't get me wrong, I enjoy Arma for what it is, but you have to be honest, that is the appeal for that is always going to have a ceiling.
Yep. One of the more popular within that niche that I've seen has been Foxhole, which is a persistent realistic milsim.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very popular, but it's even more niche.
And well, when it comes to the sim end of racing, we've already tackled that.
There's an entire GeekWatch episode about it.
Mm-hmm. But I remember somebody asking me about doing a Ghost in the Shell TTRPG and using cyberpunk, and originally I would have been all for that, but upon reflection, I've come to especially after our cyberpunk incident, I've come to realize that doing that in that system would create problems, especially since even if somebody isn't playing as Kusanagi, Kusanagi is not the sole full conversion cyborg in that universe.
Full conversion cyborgs are extremely common. The Tachikoma are full conversions. They're just full conversions into tank bodies. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if people understand that the Tachikoma were not AI, but they are humans inside an entirely different body system. So, just a little heads up there about Gits next time you read or watch it. It's an entirely different.
Something I did not know. That's actually changes a lot of things about that.
Well, they don't have full-on emergent AI in Ghost in the Shell. In fact, that's kind of part of the question that some of the movies and some of Standalone Complex and some of the manga all attempt to ask and answer. Whether the people who are full conversions are really human anymore or just something mimicking that. I mean, the point of the title, Ghost in the Shell, comes from that, transhumanist post-singularity identity crisis. But that's a conversation for an entirely different GeekWatch. In the end, Ghost in the Shell would likely need its own system, or at least a cyberpunk system that doesn't impose restrictions on cyberware. Because full-body conversion cyborgs, Monk, would definitely in cyberpunk incur cyberpsychosis, and would definitely in something like Shadowrun incur zero humanity. Your character would be broken before you could use it. You definitely need a different system, and perhaps a less, I guess, combat-focused system. I hesitate to call Cyberpunk combat-focused, but Shadowrun is definitely more combat-focused. There are things that happen in Ghost in the Shell that are essentially you have to have those introspection times. And you have to have the investigations and the mysteries. It needs
would fit as a system.
What's that?
Gumshoe.
Absolutely. I could see Gumshoe doing a lot of Ghost in the Shell. Yes.
I mean, Gumshoe can handle combat, and it has done that all right. However, Gumshoe was built for investigative campaigns.
And I'd like to point out that even with Ghost in the Shell, combat is short and frenetic. It does not last long. Anyone who has watched Ghost in the Shell 1995 movie specifically still has Birth of Cyborg stuck in their head. I guarantee it. And also, the most memorable moments of that movie are moments of stillness or very little movement. The introspective, the serene, and sometimes the surreal as well. Sure, the big set piece at the end is a big thing people remember too, but that was a set piece. It was meant to do. So, Ghost in the Shell, it does have its combat, and as you said, Gumshoe handles combat adequately. But you're part of the police, or maybe part of some sort of private eye. There are things you could probably pick up that aren't just Section 9 in GITS. Mm-hmm. And so I could see Gumshoe doing kits. There might be better systems if we dig deeper, but this is just off the top of our head.
Yeah, and the reason I've talked about system does matter, and the reason why I always focus on that is there is this narrative that you can use a given system to run anything. While that is technically correct, sometimes I know we have the meme about technically correct being the best kind of correct, but sometimes you can be technically correct and still wrong.
The big thing is, when you say you can use X or Y system for anything, any type of fantasy, any type of gameplay, you are only technically correct in the fact that in most systems, they're built for a purpose. Special built. You would have to skeletonize the system and create a bunch of homebrew to get the exact fantasy you're looking for. And as we always say, homebrew should be a garnish, not the main dish.
Mm-hmm.
Or you run into the other side of that. You decide that, well, you're going to use a universalist system because it's in the name, universalist. Sure, you can run everything with a universalist system, with all of the pros and cons that a universalist system has.
Yes, I'm,
So you're
I'm aware of the GURP stands screaming in the background. You are the last people who have any room to talk about the pros and cons.
there is always a balancing act you're going to play if you don't find the system that best fits the fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to either have to deal with the pros and cons of universalist systems, or you're going to have to deal with the homebrew monster.
Yeah.
But there will always be give and take.
And this is also why it's important to do that kind of research, because understanding how to replicate the spirit of what you're adapting is more important than adapting the letter. Because in a lot of cases, somebody will adapt something a little bit too straight, and this is a great segue for me to bring up. Unfortunately, Zan, the Power Rangers RPG.
Urge to kill rising.
Don't worry. I'm just as mad as you are, and I think it's telling that that's the one that hasn't gotten any real expansions since it came out.
They fucked up so bad they cannot fix it, or at least they don't want to try and fix it because the fuck up is so bad.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about this, but it wanted to boast about being the being the only book you need to run a Power Rangers campaign. And I suppose one could make that argument if we're talking about Season 1 MMPR and very little else.
Season 2 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because Season 2 is when we got the White Ranger.
Which I do want to note with that, having a class system is not, even though they called it roles, but let's be honest, it's classes. having that is not necessarily a problem.
No. Having a class system is not a problem. It is a problem when the classes also dictate what type of personality your character has.
Specifically, having the Ranger colors as classes was the true problem.
Having the Ranger colors as classes was a problem, yes. I just also don't like the fact that they only ever focused on like one type of person for each color. I was was like, oh, you know who they're evoking from the series with this color? It's not any of the other Red Rangers. It is 100% most definitely Jason.
Which is a bit of a callback to why I opened this up with the TSR Indiana Jones, because it's the exact same problem.
Yeah, you're not playing roles. You're not playing your characters. You're playing the Power Rangers. You're playing the stars. You're not playing your own characters in your own fun little world.
And I've been on enough forums to say that that's not what people want.
God, no.
There's way too many homebrewed Sentai teams on way too many forums and way too many art websites to say that.
I am about to invoke some old cringe, and if any of my buddies from online who remember this old cringe and were part of it remember their roles. Hey guys, anybody remember Mythology Sentai Kami Ranger? Huh? My own internal cringe. A Sentai series I made with my friends based on different gods of the world.
Mm-hmm.
With the extra ranger being from Atlantis. Just because he could be.
Yeah. But of course there was also the issue of trying to turn things like Zords into just a bigger form of vehicles in the equipment section.
That was, I'll consider that just a we didn't have enough time to make Zords part, or we got too lazy to try and make Zords their own thing part.
Well, as I said when we did the reconstruction and when I did my review, a lot of the writers involved mostly had a background in the world's most litigious RPG, and not even doing anything beyond adventure modules.
Mm-hmm. Hanlon's razor applies, everybody.
Mm-hmm. And in that the big reason why I point out the interpretation is it is very important to understand the spirit of what the appeal is of the particular IP that you're working with in order to carry that into the mechanics of whatever system you're using. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember Zan and I remember you and I having lengthy discussions on focusing on that, in part because so many other entries just focus on a particular game or era, and that was it. But we wanted to think long term.
Yeah. We wanted to capture the soul rather than a specific game.
And I think a case in point when it comes to this is some of the debates that were happening around FF16, where people were autistically screeching over it having more of an action-based affair. And,
yes, being an character action game, basically.
Mm-hmm. And what really helped codify our take was some of the works of the homeless potato. One of the few potatoes we won't bully, and in fact, I'd actually like to get him on the show one day.
Don't lie, we'll still bully him.
Probably. We keep making short jokes about spoiler.
Maybe that's why she won't come back on anymore.
No, in her case, it's schedule issues.
Oh, I know. I just had to make that joke.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to remind everybody about the other things that we kept reminding everybody about, two different things. Hironobu Sakaguchi is quoted as saying, Final Fantasy doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional RPG. Mainline titles can even be novels or movies. And both Hironobu Sakaguchi and Tase, who's the Final Fantasy brand manager, said that Final Fantasy is whatever the director making the latest installment thinks is the best game and the best story at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, doesn't have to be an RPG.
Yeah. And when it comes, if somebody was to adapt, say well, actually, I suppose let me trying to think of what a recent example of something that's been announced but hasn't had its proper adaptation yet. Um, I'd say because I remember that there was one that was that was announced. And I'm not gonna bring up TMNT and Other Strangeness. That wasn't a new announcement. That was just something that was brought in, or something that was brought back, I should say.
Ooh. Well, that's a fun thing to see on my Twitter timeline just now.
What?
From Software is having a magnificently large, I said large, and I was going to reverse the letters there. A magnificently large hiring spree.
Interesting. But I suppose one example I could bring up is the fact that as has been established, RuneScape is getting a TTRPG and a board game. I have no idea how that's going to pan out.
Mm-hmm.
But the but the key thing with it is I think designing it should replicate the feel of RuneScape, but not necessarily replicate the mechanics of the actual game. Especially since the actual game is kind of bare bones, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Bare bones by design, but still bare bones. And uh, I can just as well bring up the the fact that, as was established at Gen Con, we are getting a Stormlight Archives RPG.
Yes, which is fucking great.
And I know some people ended up panicking about that, but Sanderson is not far removed from Oda in the fact that he is very hands-on with adaptations of his work. Which is why Mistborn ended up turning out as well as it did.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I saw, just looking at the example character sheet, it doesn't look like it's going to be using any familiar setup. Of course, there are ways to screw this kind of thing up. I'd say one of the big examples of screwing things up this year would probably be the Cowboy Bebop RPG.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I'm very, very cautious that Mana Project Studio is working on Ghost in the Shell Arise in TTRPG form. The only reason I'm giving it somewhat of a chance is Pete Petruccia, who was one of the designers of Necrobiotic, which is a very interesting card-based affair, is going to be one of the designers. But beyond that, I don't know. And we've talked about it in the past, but the big reason Cowboy Bebop ended up not working was because they didn't let the main designer cook.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure the full details, but just not letting him cook and not quite getting the point, because I think for it seems that a lot of designers have can't quite grasp that when adapting certain material, going abstract is something that you have to do. Imagine the ridiculousness, for instance, of trying to do a more simulationist approach to an RPG based on an anime. Pick any, and you it doesn't matter which anime you pick, you'd end up having this problem.
Hmm.
And Lucas is bringing up how about what happened with Toriyama and Evolution, and saying hope that doesn't happen to Sanderson. There is no way that can happen to Sanderson.
Anderson wouldn't sign a contract that wouldn't allow him to interfere as much as he wants.
Is
The man is very particular about the things he writes in his world and his IP. He would definitely make sure that whatever licensing contract would be signed to whomever to make the game wouldn't have clauses that allow him to personally get in and correct things if necessary. Now, Sanderson is not, in my experience, enough of a person to try and interfere in literally every part of it and become a nuisance. He would definitely defer to actual experts in, say, game design.
mm-hmm.
But he would still, for purposes of plot and lore and world building and everything else, he would be hands on as much as possible.
Yeah. Of course, there's some IP that, even though I like them, I would be against using them for a TTRPG, even though they've been done. One big example for me is Dishonored.
I can see why.
Oh,
I can definitely see why.
well, why would you think I'd be against it? Just to see if we're on the same page.
The whole story of Dishonored is a focus on it's a hero's journey, and the hero's journey is very specific to the time period and specific to the people involved. You can't really get involved in the story of Dishonored without either being Corvo or being someone very close to Corvo.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. There's whereas some and I remember when I said this, somebody said to me, would you have the same attitude about, say, Thief? No, Thief would actually work better.
Because any skilled thief could get those magical powers and do those things if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be Garrett.
Garrett it's very telling that you don't see a whole lot of Garrett's character design, and I think that was done on purpose to make him kind of a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily a audience surrogate, not necessarily a blank slate in the silent protagonist way. Of course, I'd imagine the other part of it was to try and keep costs as low as possible when it came to cutscenes.
Mm-hmm.
But focusing on the fact that you have this city that just happens to have this weird mix of medieval and electricity, and factions, and the different factions, whether it be the various guilds, the Thieves Guild especially. Although, don't make me think about the Thieves Guild mission again.
You did that to yourself. I didn't even say anything.
Or the Hammerites, or the Watchers. You can easily do a good amount of urban fantasy campaigns, because the stuff that the Woodsy Lord tried to pull in the Dark Project, there's no that could just as well just be one particular story,
Mm-hmm.
out of many. I'd say another example of something that I suppose you that would be a bit I'd be a bit hesitant in adapting into TTRPG. I know it's being done, but I'm still a bit perplexed. Homeworld.
Wait, say that again?
Yeah. This has been a thing that's been known for months. Homeworld getting a TTRPG.
Oh yeah, but I mean, like, how you couldn't? How, how do they plan on exploring that particular sandbox? That's my question. Because that's a big sandbox to work with, and there's a ton of things you could do with it.
I don't know the full details. The main thing that I know is it's being published by Modifius, so it's going to be using the 2D20 system. Um, Martin Curlis, one of the original writers, is involved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and some of the art is going to be done by Aaron Kambetz, who was responsible for a lot of the art in the original. But the big problem is Homeworld and Homeworld 2's stories aren't exactly character focused. The only Homeworld game I could say where you could kind of get away with this, and in fact it's the one I'd use as my basis, is Deserts
Mm-hmm.
of Karak.
I could see that, but I think the big thing that's going to be the defining factor is because most people go into Homeworld expecting the space stuff. Monk, let's be honest there.
Mm-hmm.
Deserts is technically an outlier, even though it's a really good game itself too. And the people are going to want the space opera part of it.
Which is under the I'd say the key thing with something like Homeworld is the space opera as well as the discovery aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is there's not a whole lot in the way of characterization to build around.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, you're most the story is mostly the story of the woman who becomes Fleet Command, but there's there's barely a whole lot that's known about her. Just to use that as an instance, and beyond the and that's why I'm a bit perplexed in that particular choice. It's there's been a few in the 2D20 system that that I was kind of confused as to why those IPs were picked. Like Conan, I can easily see that. The the world Hyperborea and the like is a big damn world. There's a lot of places that can be explored in it. Um, Dune, okay, I can kind of see it. It's even the you can there in stuff like Dune and stuff like the Dune RTSs like Dune 2, which is the godfather of the modern RTS. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't just have you didn't just have two houses fighting over Arrakis. You had multiple houses in play for that. Um, Infinity, which we've already talked about. Yeah, there's plenty of that's a war games are actually probably the easiest IP to adapt in theory. I say in theory because of my frustrations when it comes to the Mech Warrior RPGs,
Mm-hmm.
which we've already gone with. Now, for a brief summary on the issue I have with that, it's trying to use the exact same rule set as the war game, and that creates problems.
For obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, poking back to Dune, I mean, have you seen the recent one from Funcom Spice Wars?
I have.
I was actually pretty impressed with that. They did a pretty good job on that.
Mm-hmm. Uh, so and plus for me, for the longest time, the closest we could get to a Dune RPG was Chronicles of the Imperium, and good luck trying to get a physical copy of that. Like you can get it, but you're gonna have to pay out the ass to do it. Like $120 if you're lucky. It probably is. It's probably gone up since. Um, but stuff like, say, John Carter and just the Barsoom saga. There's been enough stories on Mars and the various factions within Mars that you can do whole campaigns without too much issue. Uh, but stuff but stuff like Fallout. Mm, I think anybody doing that would probably there's plenty to, there's plenty of framing devices with the games that you could work with, and I'd say that's one of the other key things is finding a framing device where you could tell just about any story. I think this is the reason why I've seen so many Mass Effect TTRPG adaptations by fans. Because there's 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 a myriad of stories you can tell with just the Citadel alone, or just with Omega alone. And in fact, it was kind of designed that way. I remember, I think it was Casey Hudson had said that they designed the Citadel with the idea of having a place where you could tell virtually any story.
Yeah, pretty sure.
And because granted, if somebody asked me what framing device I'd utilize, I'd probably go with the Reaper War, just because you can have a decent way to introduce a variety of conflicts, but there's other options. The key thing is you should present it in a way where you don't have to rely too much on the source material.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the story that you're seeing in the source material is just one story of many potential stories that could take place. That's always been the attitude that I've taken.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I think that the that this is why this is why I remember somebody saying, well, if you can adapt just about anything into a TTRPG, could you adapt Doom? And I'm like, I could do something that's a Doom like, but adapting Doom straight on, no, because everybody's going to want to be the Doom guy, and I'm not interested in doing that. And I don't think any of you would be interested in playing a game where everybody's the Doom guy.
That wouldn't really make sense.
Even if we were just using the original trilogy, it wouldn't make sense. Or anything pre 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And now something like Aliens, that has been able to work very, very well, because there's multiple angles you can take. Like if somebody wants to do the combat heavy stuff, have everybody be different colonial marines. If somebody wants to go with if somebody wants to go with the exploration aspect, that's doable too. If somebody wants to do a little bit of both, that's still doable. The variety of angles is something that has to be taken into account. And understanding how many angles you can potentially take in terms of campaign styles.
Hell, you can even go the different groups fighting against each other within the game.
Mm-hmm. Because contrary to the belief of certain OSR diehards, not every game needs to be a dungeon crawl. In fact, you can add that to the myriad of list of reasons why I don't consider myself an OSR gamer. Because when I look at a lot of the games that are espoused by that, with rare exception, like say Archon stuff, so many people have this over romanticization of the dungeon crawl, mostly because a lot of the early games, that's the dungeon crawl and dungeon survival was what they were built around. The problem is that's only one style. And when you have a infinite sandbox that is tabletop gaming, confining yourself to one style is dumb. Very dumb. But it's going back to the I know we've dealt with a lot of science fiction ones, but I think that's because those are settings where you can easily do just about anything.
Yeah.
One would think you'd be able to do something similar in fantasy, but that ultimately depends on the type of fantasy. And this is where it's very important to establish a world first, and then fill that world with your particular characters.
Yeah, especially since a lot of people, when they imagine fantasy, at least in the West, they likely imagine what we have colloquially called the Tolkien melting pot.
Neff, Monarch, have we explained to you what the Tolkien melting pot entails?
I think I pretty much can get it just from the name alone.
Oh. Basically, that Western Europe pastiche is the short version of it. And I've got nothing against Tolkien, but I have everything against the idea of that's what you're supposed to do if you're doing fantasy. That's why I always tell people about how there were folks arguing that Planescape should be considered science fiction and not fantasy. Which, if that sounds ridiculous, that's because it is. And I'd say another example of something where doing a straight adaptation would not work, but doing something that has some of the spirit of it would work better is pretty much every character action game that we've experienced in the last 20 years. Because like just look at how difficult it would be to adapt, say, Devil May Cry, without having the characters just be XPs of Dante, Virgil, and Nero.
Yeah, adapting Devil May Cry to TTRPG, you'd have to, in my opinion, you'd actually have to make it so that somehow Dante has finally made Devil May Cry a successful venture that is now a franchise.
That's basically what Ghostbusters International did.
Mm-hmm.
Except, the original Ghostbusters was run by people who were smart. Dante's not an idiot, but I wouldn't call him a genius either. He is simple. Which it sounds like I'm not. It sounds like I'm damning with faint praise. I'm aware of that. But And truth be told, if somebody were to say what to use as a base mechanically, probably something like all of their strengths or feng. I was gonna say feng shui, but feng shui is too married to its setting.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do it, but you're gonna have to make a bunch of stuff out of whole cloth, and you'd run into that same problem of just making XPs of the established characters in terms of mechanics. Whereas with something like all of their strengths, which if you want details on that, look at the Valley of the Judge where we covered it. Um, because everybody is some sort of half thing or has some sort of supernatural bent, you can easily make it work because it is very abstract. So you don't have to worry about putting too much in the way of stunts, and the framing device of Devil May Cry as a supernatural detective agency slash monster hitman thing. You can utilize it just and without it having to need Dante and the like. That's why that kind of in the spirit would give you a lot more freedom than trying to do it straight. I know that there was that board game, but that board game was made by Simon during their unfortunate days. They're trying to clean up their act. Um,
Hmm.
and speaking of that, um, I know some people are perplexed at it, but I do think Assassin's Creed is a natural fit for TTRPG. I've seen some people hemming and hawing about the fact that it's using custom dice, but this approach of modern day versus exploring ancestors and the bleed over between the two.
Yeah.
That's that was done in the early 2000s with Fireborn. It's this idea of dual era stuff is not a new thing or an uncommon thing for that matter.
Honestly, I think I'd rather see a Assassin's Creed TTRGB than what they've been putting out lately for the video games.
Well, Ubisoft isn't directly involved with the TTRPG, so you can rest easy there. Now, granted, all that I have on it is just the quick start, which I did do an unimpressions video on a few months ago. The the thing that apparently some folks were bitching about was the fact that it was using a symbol-based D6 system instead of using standard dice. Because whenever a game wants to use its own custom dice setup, some people start to act stupid. Even more ironic is when somebody talks about the custom die system in Genesis being ridiculous, and yet I look at they're currently playing and they have Fate games, which use fudge dice.
Hmm.
I know some argue that you can use standard D6s, but in my experience, nobody does. Even the rule set within Fate says the plus minus approach that you could use is not advisable because it's going to make things really swingy.
Hmm.
Like and I don't have anything against people using fudge dice or anything like that. It's just I don't like hypocrites. If you're gonna get on a game for using symbol-based dice, then you shouldn't be playing one yourself. Admittedly, I could see some people having an issue with Assassin's Creed approach in the fact that there isn't really a attribute plus skill approach with how many with it with the best way to there isn't really a expanding amount of die you're always rolling 6 die, and your attribute score is the base the base amount of die you need with that symbol to pass. Uh, is the gist of it. So it is kind of working backwards from what people would expect. But this is a case of people expecting that a TTRPG needs certain things that it really doesn't. Uh, when I wrote it in the FF Legend document, you probably saw that whole, you remember that whole definition thing that I put in.
Mm-hmm.
I specifically avoided putting in things like dice and GM because those aren't necessarily required.
Yeah.
Hell, games like Emberwind, if I wanted to, I could run that completely GM-less. There's rules for that, and GM-less games are rare, but they are a thing. But I think one of the other things that's important when dealing with IP adaptation is making sure that you give players guidance on the potential off the beaten path stuff that they can do. Uh, and even though it's not adapting an IP, this is where I had my major issue with Fabula Ultima. Like, it calls itself a JTTRPG, but so much of it has blank check design and doesn't give a whole lot of guidance for those blank checks.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there was that one guy who was like, well, it's trusting the players and GM to have enough creativity where they can make their own stories. You should not be doing those kind of assumptions. That is the romanticization of the just add more role playing crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, it's a role playing game, but I think a lot of people forget about the game part when they say that. And for what it's worth, Nev, I have looked at the last few games, and if I'm being honest, when it comes to Assassin's Creed, um, the question that I keep asking is, what are you these days? Because it feels like from Origins onward, it's become kind of a Frankenstein.
Yeah, it definitely has lost a lot of its charm it had in the first early games.
Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, so I was asked what of as far as whether or not Halo or any of the other Bungie projects would work in TTRPG form. As far as that goes, you could do Halo, but I'm not having people be Spartans. Oh, at most I'd have people be ODSTs. As far as Marathon, no, no. As funny as it would be to have everybody play a bunch of Bobs, no.
Frog Blast the Vet Core!
Um, as far as Oni, maybe. I mean,
Well,
Oni is basically Ghost in the Shell in all but name.
yeah,
And
exactly. It's the best Ghost in the Shell game that isn't Ghost in the Shell.
honestly, it's the best Ghost in the Shell game, period. Because the other official ones aren't a lot to write home about. Standalone Complex is a game based on a running anime in the PS2 era. You know how this goes. Um, First Assault Recon was a barely had anything to do with Ghost in the Shell. It was another Black Ops 2 clone, but didn't have anything unique to it, like say Iron Sights does. The unique thing with Iron Sights was the fact that for one, you only regenerate half your health, so that prevented SMG spammers, and two, as a match would go on, the stage layout would change, which that is enough to establish its own identity. And as far as the PS1 game, that was just Jumping Flash 3 in all but name. So Oni ends up winning by default, essentially, even though it is kind of janky.
Hmm.
But something I've said in the past is that if you're providing me a unique experience, I can forgive jank. And try. I know that. And as far as Destiny, well, that's already been done in TTRPG form. Although I remember hearing about an attempt to do a 5e version, and I'm like, no, that's a bad idea. I honestly think the cipher system would be a better fit, especially given the rule of 3 that Destiny has. But I haven't touched Destiny in a while, so I'd have to do some catch up. Um,
Hmm.
the but there is one entry that you and I have talked about, Neff, but we haven't been able to dedicate a whole show to, that actually I think would work in TTRPG form. Myth.
Well, yeah, considering they already did try it and failed miserably.
I'm not talking about the GURPS version because that's still GURPS,
Like I said, failed miserably.
but because of some of the rules of the cycles when it comes to the leveler, or things like dream magic, um and along with a few other things, I think it could work. I'd probably end up using Forbidden Lands, which is a Year Zero engine game, as a basis. I know some people would say Vaesen. Vaesen is a little bit too in the horror end of things. Myth.
Okay. Actually, I can see Dragonbane because it's a little more loose when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Forbidden Lands and Dragonbane are in a similar tier of fantasy. Um, and as far as dream magic goes, I haven't seen a whole lot that would necessitate a whole different set of mechanics for it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Uh, I know that there is the implication that dream magic is rooted in beings like the Worken Kakantur, but because of how much is interpretive when it comes to myth, there's no way to really say that. I think the reason a lot of people think that is because of the weird noises coming out of the maw, where you tossed Balor's head.
Yeah, that there was a lot of stuff that they left up to interpretation, which honestly I liked.
Of course, the big one is, and I don't think this was ever actually explained. Who is the head?
You're talking in the first one, right?
Yeah,
That is a good question. I'm not sure if that ever was answered.
it there's the simultaneous problem of answers were given, but the problem is the head is not reliable as a source, because several things that he ends up saying contradict each other. The I, I suppose the closest theory that I've come up with is that at one point um the head was either someone who was a candidate to be a fallen lord, or somebody who was once the leveler.
That's actually the one that's the most common that I've heard, is that the head was the former leveler.
Mm-hmm. The one that came before Connacht.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Although I never did finish playing Myth 3, so I can't exactly say. And I think, and that one was actually in the time of Conic, so it might have actually explained.
On one hand, possibly, but Myth 3 wasn't developed by Bungie. That was outsourced. So its
Yeah, exactly.
canonicity is up in the air.
Yeah, exactly.
And because of the fact that there is that cyclic nature, there is a whole lot of stories that can be told, as well as the fact that there is the implication throughout the story of Myth 1 and 2. There is that implication that there's a whole lot of bigger stuff going on, but you're not a part of it.
And then, of course, you get to the whole end of Myth 2, where it actually implicates that the cycle has been broken finally.
Well, that it could be broken, but nobody's gonna know for a few centuries.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, so we've got an opening here.
Mm-hmm.
The seal has been broken.
But and truth be the other thing that does lend credence is the fact that consider the journal entries between missions. It's rarely any of the big hitters that are telling that story. It's always a random soldier that's giving their diary entries.
That's one of the things I absolutely loved about that game, was the way that they presented the lore.
Mm-hmm. Now, now, I agree with Mandalore when he said that the Mercridia are best used unseen instead of seen.
Yeah, that was one thing that did bother me about Myth 2.
Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong, I like Myth 2, and it's a hell of a lot easier to run, but um, but narratively speaking, it isn't as strong. It's that weird dichotomy, but it could work. Um, I'd say anything that's going low fantasy but not necessarily sword and sorcery would be one approach to do it. I wouldn't even if I was setting it up, I wouldn't even allow Dream Magic as an option. Uh, Now, as far as the other forms of craziness, yeah, I'd still allow that. Say dwarves having a love for things that go boom.
That's how all dwarves should be.
Yeah, and I know some people are like, why would dwarves use explosives when they're underground? It's like, you gotta break. What do you expect them to break through all that rock with just pickaxes? You can make very careful explosions. Of course.
That's what a shaped charge is.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I'd even go I'd even go a bit further and give dwarves flamethrowers.
I could see that.
Why give dwarves flamethrowers? Once again, elves live in trees.
Ulrich gets the heavy Flammenwerfer.
But admittedly, it is tricky to turn a RTS or a war game into not a war game, but a RTS in general into a TTRPG unless you have a very strong setting. Because
Otherwise, it's better to turn them into a war game.
mm-hmm. Like I've been waffling back and forth about adapt whether or not Fire Emblem would be better served as a war game or as a TTRPG. But but regardless of which one you pick, I do think allowing for large scale skirmish rules is paramount.
My answer was going to be ¿Por qué no los dos?
And the big example a lot of people when they think about doing the large scale skirmish, they're thinking, just take the war game rules and integrate that as a subtype. You can do that, but that's not the approach that I'd end up taking. The approach I'd end up taking in that kind of situation is more akin to the mass battle rules in Legend of the Five Rings,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a personal turn and then you have a tide of battle turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the best visual example I can think of for that kind of thing, I know some people are going to cringe, but Dynasty Warriors.
People can cringe about Dynasty Warriors all they want. The Musou games are fantastic for the most part.
I think you see why I'm using that as the visual example of what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Because events happen, and you can certainly play a part in those events, but control-wise, you are one person in this whole army.
Yeah. I mean, let's be fair, though. In Dynasty Warriors, the one person in the whole army you're playing is a hero. So it's like having an HQ unit, at least in wargame terms.
Well, in actuality, there is one game that I've done an interview with recently that would provide a good template, and that is Inheritors, which is a TTRPG wargame hybrid, and has its own rules for your HQ unit, essentially your hero, and followers. It's loosely inspired by a similar rule set that's in Frostgrave.
Okay. Might be cool to use that for Fire Emblem then.
Yeah, I just have to figure out a way to do the weapon triangle in a way that's going to fit what I'd want, because I wouldn't want to use the weapon triangle as is, because much like what we did with FF Legend, I'd want to future-proof it so that if somebody wants to do this experience in other styles of game, in other fantasy subgenres, it can be utilized just as much. Since we have been seeing a fair amount of that on the indies.
Yeah.
Lost Eidolons is a far more dark fantasy approach to the Fire Emblem model, just to use one example, and Dark Deity is doing its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few others, but I digress.
Indeed. But I think with this, Monk, we've probably demonstrated how the considerations for adapting any IP to a TTRPG is to research games and the actual source material to find the best sandbox you can to accommodate it.
I'd say not just research the source material, but also research, say, if you can come across interviews or the like, or the behind the scenes stuff, that should be on the research pile as well.
Absolutely. And with that, you'll have a great basis with which to build the sandbox you need.
Mm-hmm. But I'd say as far as the things to avoid, the big one is to understand that you're adapting the world that it takes place in, not the source material itself.
Yeah. This isn't to say that you couldn't possibly, like you pointed out with the Slayers TTRPG, that hey, the events of this episode are happening around this time, but you don't have to be a part of the events of that episode.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is to avoid a alpha archetype, an IP that has a particular archetype that ends up outshining everything else, or has too strong of an appeal.
Yeah. You don't want to adapt part of the IP that centralizes the game.
Mm-hmm. And the third don't is to be very careful in what sort of mechanics you're going to use.
Yeah.
Because you cannot just brute force a particular set of mechanics that are designed for one kind of game into another.
Well, like I said, that was part of I think when I said, choosing the correct sandbox that suits your needs.
Yeah. And also remember that every game is someone's first.
We say that one a lot.
Mostly because I think a lot of people who have a modicum of experience, even if it's experience with just one game, don't end up forgetting that kind of perspective, and take their own perspective, which has a healthy amount of experience, and applying that as if that's the universal standard.
Yeah, they don't remember that at one point they didn't have that particular perspective.
Mm-hmm. And of course I'd say the final thing is don't assume that people just want to play as the characters from the IP.
Yeah, make sure that they can be whoever they want to be inside the sandbox,
Mm-hmm.
or at least fulfill their fantasy in some way.
Yeah. And the last thing is spirit, not letter.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with that's we've more or less covered the subject matter as best we'd be able to.
Yeah, I think we've exhausted every avenue.
Um, and with that said, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness that happens around here. And we will be back again next week with a little something different, and revisiting a concept we haven't done in a while. I do. Fortunately for me, I only have one interview this week, and that's with the developer of Gunbelt. But Thursday, I'll be continuing my look at Brass and Steel with Monarch, which I'd say has been going pretty well. Certainly better than last season.
Thank Christ, it's been better than Valhalla.
Mm-hmm. And Friday we will not be doing Valley of the Judged on Planet Bound, because Xanatrix and I will be guests on the Legion of Myth.
Yep, we're gonna be going on another podcast.
Mm-hmm. So that should be fun. That should be fun. And I'll probably reach out to Max just to make sure we're not talking out of our ass about that, or there's been some last minute surprise, which I don't think is likely.
Yeah, I don't think that's likely either.
Mm-hmm. But with that said, that will be what we've got planned for this week. I do have I forgot to mention, November the 4th, Cloister of the Dice returns as we wrap up the first half of the Emberwind campaign. And
Indeed.
the week afterwards, on the 11th, we're doing a session 02, I guess you could say.
No, let's not invoke Darling in the Franks, please.
I was invoking Common Writer.
You know what? You'd have to say Common Writer 02.
But The point is that on the 11th the second half begins, which is going to have a because it's in a completely different area in the world, a fresh set of characters, and me bending the rules a little bit to do some stuff I wanted to.
Oh, let's not forget that I'm joining them for the second half, so I'm going to be introducing more chaos into his life.
As if you don't do that enough already.
I
Yeah,
said more
chaos.
for a reason.
Mhm.
More for a reason, Monk. More
Yeah.
chaos.
So, as Yoshi P would say, please look forward to it. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.